welcome to everybody. Welcome Abigail, Daisy, Alina and Holly. I'm delighted to introduce you to a very good friend of mine, Hugh Evans, and just thrilled that he could be here to talk with you today because in my spare time, I'm a head teacher of a primary school, Ursley Primary School in Herefordshire, and I had the great pleasure as a teaching head of having a Zoom session with my children, with you, and several other schools from across the country last year. And we had the Pupils Parliament, and it was just ace. So that's why I begged with you to come on today to share his magic and expertise, because I can't recommend it highly enough. We just all had the most terrific time, and it was so brilliant for the children. They just loved it. So I think on that note, Hugh, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. That was a very kind introduction. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Pupil Parliament and Pupil Voice in particular. I'm going to share some presentation. I'd really love to hear from you. I know you probably don't want to interrupt me, but that's brilliant. But once I've gone through the presentation, I really do want to sort of talk to you about it. So it's more of a dialogue, but I just want to contextualize certain aspects of Pupil Voice and Pupil Parliament first. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to share a very brief PowerPoint, which is basically about that bigger picture of getting children to communicate better, making them feel better, and making them valued. One of the most underused tool, I feel, in a lot of schools is Pupil Voice. Pupil Voice is such a powerful tool in all sorts of ways. And I want to basically think about the big picture first before we go into discussing a bit more about the Pupil Parliament and communicating with other schools, because that is the key thing to think about. Is your school actually in a place for the Pupil Parliament to be successful? So I'm just going to talk about the key things about talking and listening, the skills for life. Huge amount of emphasis on this. There's been a change in early years, for example, in the English curriculum, and there's always been a focus on speech and language, but not the revised approach includes a lot more focus on the adults talking to the young people. And that interaction, that communication, that conversation, that dialogue is really, really important. And I think particularly after what we've been through the last couple of years with regards to that limited conversation that's actually happened for a huge number of children. They've missed out on some really high quality conversation that could have happened between families and with their friends, and obviously in school. And the early years, that focus on speech and language, it's around that modelled language and that scaffolded talk. And there's a huge amount of discussion about that in early years. But sadly, that fades away as you go through the national curriculum, and there's much more emphasis on reading, writing and maths, and not so much on that language until we get to key stage 2, when there's a lot more focus on that interaction. But the key thing is should be built on, as far as I'm concerned, it's that whole approach to it. The listening to others is really important, and that sort of peer-to-peer conversation is essential. I'm picking up in a lot of schools I work with that part of the issue with COVID has been that inability to interact well with some peers. They haven't had that opportunity, particularly younger children, to learn how to respond to others. The other aspect is actually listening to yourself. And most teachers are very, very good at developing specific skills in writing, because they see what the child writes and they respond to that, and then improves the quality of the writing. But we need to also think about that with regards to speech and language, listening to the children, developing their language, developing their speech, developing their spoken grammar. And I think that as they listen to themselves and listen to that modeled language, they will actually improve. But that needs to be a little bit more explicit, I think, and that links into that developing of oracy, because the more they listen to themselves, not only does it involve an improvement in vocabulary, an improvement in language, but it also improves that understanding of themselves. And it's something that then you can move on to when they're older, to consider the key aspect of metacognition, so they can start talking about how they think. And there's a huge amount of research that shows that metacognition is one of the most powerful tools to improve pupil performance. But the metacognition isn't just about able to talk about how they approach maths, for example. It also about the language of emotion. And I think the more that you can actually talk about yourself and how you feel, then the better you are in those relationships with other children. The language of emotion is crucial, and the VbE work does a huge amount of work with regards to understanding how to interact with other children, and I think that's essential. The classic example is a child who has an issue saying that they're angry. Well, angry might have a specific response, but they might not be angry, but they don't have the language to say, I'm frustrated, I'm embarrassed, sort of, I don't want to be in this situation, but all that comes out is I'm angry. And so the development of that a language from an early age all the way through makes a huge difference, both academically and with regards to that sort of personal development with expressing feelings and so on. So I think that that's where it needs to start, because if you drop something like Pupil Parliament in too soon, you're not actually going to get it to be as effective as you possibly want it to be. Before I move on to the next slide, the reason why I put that parrot in there, by the way, because that's the chattiest bird in the world. And I thought that was actually quite a nice link to trying to encourage people to develop that sort of interaction. It's a African grey, and they're apparently the chattiest. Not that I've ever met any, but that's what I've been told. The most important thing is to make it whole school. If you might be passionate about it, and that's brilliant, and you'll be able to make a difference, definitely, without a doubt. But the most difference happens when it's whole school. And that's linked into the approach to VbE as well, because VbE truly works its magic when it's actually a whole school approach. So anything that you feel it is so important, if you can get everybody lined up to deliver that, then it makes such a difference. And it is a clear way of valuing the children, enabling them to share what they feel about their learning and about their personal development and their behavior and so on, and knowing that everybody in the school values that. That makes a massive. So I think that's really important. And of course, it contributes to the child's feeling of self-worth. And I think, again, that's another powerful aspect of pupil voice. if you are developing Pupil Voice, there's lots of ways to do it. And you are probably already doing a lot of things. You're probably interested in this, and that's why you've signed up for this today. So you're probably covering a lot of this. And the reason why I've included this is not because I don't think this is happening, but it's a way to perhaps bring other people on board with you. Because as soon as they get that sort of taste of the magic of pupils responding in a positive way, in an encouraging way, they'll want to do more. And you can start off really, really small with just a suggestion box that the children just put in some suggestions. I do a huge amount of conversations with pupils in school. I'm probably got the best job in the world. I go around and talk to lots and lots of children. And one of the questions I ask is, if I made you head teacher for the day, what would you change? What one thing would you change? So you've got a piece of paper on your table as your head teacher, and what would you actually change? And it's fascinating what responses you get from the idea about having a fountain in the playground. Lots of children want fountains. I don't know where they get that idea from, but sort of they just love having fountains. To I wish my teacher would listen more to me. You know, sort of that sort of thing. So it's great. And the little suggestion box or the piece of paper, that's a great place to start. You can do a slight twist to it with regards to a worry box if there's anything they're particularly worried about, and you can follow that up. Particularly useful for children who may be reluctant in actually talking. Class discussions are essential. Class discussions tend to happen quite a bit around PSHE, but why don't you include one in maths? You know, sort of, and it'll help some of the children to think that perhaps there isn't just always the right answer. So just, you know, getting those children involved in that conversation and listening to them. Group work is really important, and you could tighten that up with labeling some of the members in the group. So, okay, well, you're the person in charge, so you're going to make sure that everybody has a go. You are going to be the person that keeps an eye on the time. You're going to be the person that writes things down. One thing with regards to writing that I've noticed, I'm from doing lots of lesson observations, if you give a blank piece of paper to a group of pupils, boys and girls, say 4, and there's a pen in the middle, most of the time it'll be a girl that picks up that pen. And I think that's an interesting observation. And, you know, sort of, I don't know if you would feel that it matches your observations, and that's fine, you know, sort of, but once you've got the pen, you've got an editing right. And I think that's the thing that you've got to be careful about, is that sort of involvement, getting everybody involved in that sort of conversation with the class discussion. It has to be a sort of an active part that you play in that, encouraging that conversation between everybody around the table and helping them in their different roles. Lots of schools have peer helpers. They have them in the classroom. Lots of schools now have them outside of playtimes, play buddies, and people who monitor the equipment and so on. And you can move that up another level to have clubs, eco clubs, and school council is one of the most powerful things within school that can move on to more of the Pupil Parliament, the school council sharing the pupil voice in assemblies, so that it's important that they participate in assemblies. School ambassadors, important. I went around one school in Wolverhampton the other day, and each class had 2 school ambassadors who saw me at the door and got up and walked over and explained what they were learning and talked to me about it. And every single one of them in all of the classes I went to had massive smiles on their faces, which was great, because they felt that it was really important to share that information and that they felt valued by it. And then you've got the well-structured philosophy lessons that really do tend to get the pupil voice going. But the reason why I'm saying this, that if you want to end up with effective pupil parliaments, effective school councils, you've got to build that up. You know, you wouldn't be doing higher order reading skills if children couldn't decode. You wouldn't be looking at reasoning if children didn't have number sense. You know, sort of, you wouldn't be asking children to design experiments if they didn't have a concept of variables. So you've got to be able to start with this whole school approach to encouraging them to value their own voice, and for the staff to value the voice as well. Who do you involve? Well, I would say involve everybody. I think that's really, really important. You know, diversity is such an important aspect that tends to be not really put high enough on the agenda with regards to a lot of schools, but values schools do. They really value every single individual and encourage them to be part of the whole life of the school. I'll give you one example of a recent pupil voice that I've done between schools on Zoom. We involved 2 boys from the local social, emotional and mental health needs centre. One was on the spectrum. They both struggled with mainstream school, and that's why they were not there. They took part in the interaction in that pupil voice, in that parliament between other schools, mainstream schools. They were absolutely amazing. They talked, explained their point of view to start off with. They read it from their notes, which is fine. And then when it came to question time, the most questions came from them, and it really involved them. I said to the head how wonderful they were, and we had a discussion about that, and they felt safe in their environment, particularly around their personal space, but they could interact so effectively with other children of the same age that they would not have been able to interact with if they'd physically been in the same room. So what's evolved from that is now I'm working with that group of schools so that those children in that school they're now linking with the mainstream school for part of the lessons, and that is how the transition back in the mainstream for those schools for those children is actually going to happen. And that's all come from that pupil voice experience, demonstrating to people that they were so relaxed in that environment that will help them to get back into mainstream. So involve everybody. I think it is really, really important. So what would you talk to them about when you do the pupil parliament or when you do the pupil voice? Well, choose a range, you know, because not everybody's particularly interested in how the playground's going to be developed or what you do at break time, or, you know, sort of, or uniform, you know, sort of what there's not going to really stimulate conversation. People who's not interested. So do a range of things. The values are a great way into this, you know, sort of asking them how they demonstrate a particular value, give examples of that, I think, which is so useful. The one that Bridget referred to was, the question was, how had the fact that you've been in a values school helped you to deal with the issues around COVID? And the responses were amazing. And it was lovely to see such honesty with those children. And you could watch the faces of the other children, and there was sometimes relief on their faces when they understood that it's not just them that's gone through that sort of issue, and that they had teachers and adults and other children surrounding them that actually made it easier for them to get through a difficult period successfully. So make sure that you choose a range of focuses, aspects of the school, or even beyond climate change. They love talking about climate change. They're really worried that we're not doing anything about it. And so by the time they're adults, there won't be much of a planet left to manage. So they're passionate about that, really. So make sure there's a range. That's the point of that one. And the other thing that is so important, don't just pay lip service. That is an insult to the children. Don't ask them for opinions. Don't ask them to be involved unless you act on it. So if you're not willing to act on aspects of Pupil Voice or Pupil Parliament or whatever you decide to put in, don't even start, because it actually is not good for them to think that somebody is asking them for their opinions, but they don't really care because they're not going to do anything about it in the end. So the children that understand whether somebody values them or not very quickly. So if you're going to ask them, make sure that you follow that through. And it may be even saying, well, that's a brilliant idea, but I don't think we can afford to do that. So when talking about school finances, it's actually quite useful for some of the children to understand sort of the difficulties that our teachers have, for example, in balancing everything that the school needs. So make sure that when anything starts with regards to Pupil Voice, that you're willing to follow through and respond to them. And make sure as well that you check that if you started something off, that it's still living. The problem with schools is that you have a lot of initiatives, some that you get excited about and start yourself, but a lot that comes from government or other direction, and you could be starting something off enthusiastically, but then it might wane and you've got to just check to see if it's still got a pulse. And it might be that you might think, well, actually that worked at the time, it's not worth doing it now, let's move on to something else, let's tweak it, let's change it, let's have a different approach to that. So keep an eye on things. Don't just think, well, I've got it going and that's fine, because most of these things need continual energy put into them to keep them going. I would definitely reach out to other schools once you're feeling confident that you've got the system up and running really well within the school, with school council or Pupils Parliament. Then stretch it out, and you can now. Things like Zoom, like we're doing tonight. We're all in different parts of the country, maybe even different parts of the world, and we can actually communicate in that way. And that worked really well with the one that Bridget referred to across the country during a period where they hadn't interacted very much with anybody. So you can do it within your school cluster, or even with other colleagues that in different schools in different parts of the country, that you can actually do it. You may even be able to do it if you've got a link abroad. The only problem that you might have with that is checking the time zones, because you don't want to do a Pupil Voice at 1 a.m. in the morning, because that might be a bit difficult to keep the children awake. So, sort of make sure that you can do it. Once it gets going, it just has so many different approaches. So I've talked a lot about that sort of big picture, but you may be here and say, well, how do I set up a Pupil Parliament? And I've already got everything else sorted. Well, again, if you're putting up a structure for Pupils Parliament, I'll have to be honest, I don't think it will work unless you've got all the other things that I've talked to you about, because the children need to practice a lot about the fact that they can talk well, they develop those skills of interacting with their peers, they listen well, and then their voice is valued within the school, so they know that you've listened to them before and they've actually done that some sort of impact of what they've suggested has actually happened, so they can give examples of that. The actual Pupil Parliament is much more structured than the school council. The school council has much more of a fluidity about it, whereas the Pupil Parliament, it's meant to reflect more of a democratic organisation. So you could even have a school prime minister, and even a deputy prime minister, and then have different committees that link into different aspects of the school. You have voting, you have people presenting themselves as possible candidates. They might have to say, vote for me because I'm going to be the best for you, and why. So there's a lot of those sort of democratic processes that link into Pupil Parliament, that you do have a bit of it in school council, but it's actually a lot more structured with regards to the Pupil Parliament aspect of it. And this is just one example of a school that does it, and I'll just let you read that, but it's very much about that structure, and you decide whether you think Pupil Parliament is the right thing, or school council, or maybe you just want to explore some of the other aspects that we've actually sort of referred to with regards to Pupil Voice. So the thing is, now where would you go with all of this information? So what I'd really like to do, because I've talked a lot about that sort of bigger picture, maybe not enough about it, some of the things in detail, but we've now got an opportunity for you to ask, and I'm more than happy to go through things in a bit more detail, ask specific questions if you want to. But I thought that sort of bigger picture was a really, really good place to start. So thank you. So over to you if you've got any questions.
Thank you, Hugh. That's really interesting. My mind's racing in all sorts of different directions. Did anyone who's here have any specific points they want to discuss or any questions they want to raise?
I'm going to be brave and come on.
Well done, Holly. We're all friendly people.
No, but firstly, I just wanted to say thank you, because I started my career in a school in Luton that was a values-based school, and that's actually the reason I teach. I teach 4 values. I'm so passionate about it, absolutely. And just being in that school, it just made me realise how schools should be. So I think for me, I have just got the Pupil Parliament started, which we've changed the name from school council, and we go on a trip to the House of Parliament, which is going to be in spring term, just to really inspire them. I did that in my last school and they absolutely loved it. But I think it's because we're not quite as diverse. I'm very aware of that because I've taught in schools that are, and I know what values can do, as I know all of you do. You know, that's the reason you're here. I think you're incredible what you do. I want to use the Pupil Parliament in the right way. I want to bring a little bit of diversity to the school, and
that's wonderful to listen to. You're so enthusiastic. That is fantastic.
I love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant, and well done for setting up the Pupil Parliament, because it probably, although I obviously don't know your school, but it probably wasn't as easy as it might have been in your previous schools to sort of get to that point. So well done for doing that, and well done for getting that structure. From my point of view, there are 2 approaches to this. One, often what happens is that people like you make other people better. And I think that that's the key thing. Your enthusiasm, your devotion to ensuring that those children get the best makes a massive difference. And whether you realise that or not, but it will do with the other staff. So gradually, it will build up momentum and more people will say, well, what did you do? The children are just buzzing. What happened there? So you then gradually build that up. So that's the sort of the soul of it, the brain of it, if you want to put it in that way, is your school will be inspected. And one of the things that they look at is cultural capital, which is very much around what you're talking about, understanding and valuing other people that have been there, the community, and moving that. They will look at diversity, and they will look at in diversity in schools, particularly that have no diversity. Because they'll feel, how are those children prepared for the real world, which is very diverse? So that is an aspect. And diversity has a broadness about it, which is around the neurodiversity with regards to special needs and people on the spectrum and so on, the EAL, the religious, the sexual orientation. There's massive aspects of diversity which a school has got to address. So there might be a way in which you can actually sort of move into that. Schools that do really well in the past have had a magic protection shield, which is their key stage 2 results. Their key stage. So it's protected the school. But now,
I'm now in that school as a year 6 teacher where we're expected to get, 100%. That's kind of that is our expectation. Whereas I've come from a school of 50, 60% where actually that was deemed okay. And the more of the focus was on the well-being of the children. And it's just changing that mindset. Because
you're interested in the whole child, and I think that's clear and that's important. But the reason why I'm saying that magic shield is disappearing. It's disintegrating slowly because there's a shift from data to pedagogy. So if they can't show how those children are actually getting to that point, then it's going to be not as easy for schools like that. And it's very important that it's not just the schools the children that have got there anyway are looked at, but what about those children that are struggling? And a lot of that is around Maslow's hierarchy with regards to their basic needs and their emotional needs. So they have to look at the whole child. So I'm hoping that both those two approaches will make a difference to you. And for you, on your down days, which you probably, like all of us, have, hold on to the fact that you make a difference and link into somebody else that believes the same as you, so it re-energizes you to carry on. Yeah,
because I think just to share a nice story, like yesterday, for example, all of our classes did a democratic vote. They had to kind of present, and for our upper key stage 2 children, they had to apply to the head teacher. And then, so yesterday, the ones that had been selected through their application, they had to sit down and we gave them a task of, collectively, we just sat back and watched. We didn't ask them questions. They just had to discuss 3 things they'd like to improve about the school. And of similar words that we always hear, what their intent is, how they'd implement it, and then what the impact would be, just like us teachers have to do for everything. And that just what they came up with, it was astounding. I couldn't quite believe it. And the head was sat there and she just said, that is my school action plan. She said, they've just come up with that for me. And she was saying, actually, they should be the ones running the school. And she fully believed that. She was like, actually, they'd do a better job. And it was, we were just so proud of them, just thinking, and it is like they just so deserve the voice, because they can come up with such better things than we can, because they're living it. And I just thought it was just so refreshing, and it just gave me a little bit of the, yes, come on, let's get back to values, let's get back to doing things the way it should be. Incredible.
And that example you've given has really opened your head's eyes as well to the power of it, so that's really positive.
Thank you. I'll let someone else speak now.
Thank you. It was lovely meeting you, Holly, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
And Holly, I was just going to add, it was just occurring to me that the pupil voice might be the right way into opening up that, gently opening up that discussion about values and broadening those values that you've got at the moment. Because if they can talk about their ardent hope for the world, and peace and so on and so forth, that might just take root with other people, and it's, you just outlined how effective they were at making their voices known, so that's a thought. And I would also just very quickly add, one of the lovely things about the meeting, the Pupil Parliament we had that Hugh chaired, was that our school, we're in Herefordshire, quite not non-diverse, rural, and they were talking directly to children from very different socioeconomic backgrounds and so forth. And so in terms of diversity and opening our children's eyes, that was massive. But it wasn't, come and meet some different people. It was in the context of talking about something they shared.
Yeah, there was a real purpose to it.
Yeah, so that's a good thought to get linked up and have. Now we all know how to do Zoom.
Maybe I'll get in contact with my school in Luton, who I'm quite
yeah.
I can see that.
It was brilliant. Yeah. And we got permission for our children. I just wanted parents, you know, to know that we might, that they were meeting children. So we just got permission, and we did record it as well. So, but they were great. And once they got over that initial, you know, that initial Zoom face that you get when you first come on, they could have talked all afternoon, I'm quite sure, because they were just really warming up and getting to feel they knew one another. So yeah, so I'd really like to follow it up.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Holly. That's great. Great points.
Do we have any other questions or just comments?
I'll butt in then if I don't want to take anyone else's time up, but one thing that comes from Holly's question it is quite a big question. It's getting that whole school consistency. And I must admit, Bridget, I totally agree with you that if you've got an effective pupil parliament and you've got pupils who can speak articulately and feel passionately, that is the way in to values. But I wondered if anyone else has any tips for schools who need to get that whole school consistency. How do you get everybody on board?
I came up with an idea today, and I know that you're all, I'm guessing you're all on Twitter, aren't you? I know VbE's own things. And again, in my first 2 schools, I set up Twitter, just because, again, just to get the values in, and we mapped out the values, things like that. But this school, I haven't approached that yet, but I've kind of got this vision of if the children come up with something along those lines, or if we start discussing it in Pupil Parliament about, you know, maybe Twitter, and I just kind of feel like if it comes from the children and they can then see the difference, I just feel like if we set up Twitter, then things can be celebrated on there, and I just feel that then that might start to get a bit more of inclusivity in our school, where teachers then or staff might just start, they're recognizing what I'm doing, and it might just give children are recognizing what they're doing. And I can see that as a way in. Perhaps if I can somehow use the Pupil Parliament to enable that, I think there could be lots of benefits from it. And I think it could, just be that was a thought that I had today. I just thought, but again, I'd like it to come from the children if that's something that they'd want to do, because I can just see staff would I can see it now. If they see something positive about them, then it's going to just give them a bit of a spring in their step kind of thing.
Absolutely. Perhaps something really simple, but something catchy, like random acts of kindness.
Yeah. Which
children love to do. I was attending the National Education Show in Wales today, online. And there was a lady sharing ideas about using IT. And one of her little ideas for PSHE was a lovely thing, which you could bring into your Twitter possibly, or even just into lessons, which was where all the children on their laptops or their iPads would open a document that was theirs. So had their name on it, whatever. That she did say the name of some website to use for this, but you don't need one. And basically, they would then move one space to the left around the room, and someone would write something nice. This is an old idea that I know Hugh's done in the past on paper, but this was a lovely idea because they ended up by moving all around the class that everybody had a bank of nice comments about themselves, and they could then produce an ebook with their favorite comments in it to keep and treasure, saying, this is me and I value myself and all these people value me. And I think just little ideas like that will catch on and give you a kind of way in, really. Just a little wedge where you can start to say, well, if you liked doing that, well, there's values-based education. And I know Bridget's just put on the chat about the Pupil Values Conference. Perhaps your Pupil Parliament could attend the conference and see what they think about it. There's no better way of actually inspiring them. as Nigel said at the beginning of this, I'm not quite sure if you were with us then, Holly. We're having videos from all over the world. We had a really inspiring one from America yesterday, I think, and Nigel's got some from Nigeria today, and they're just superb. There's no better way to share the ideas behind values-based education than hearing it through Pupil Voice. That's what this is all about. So maybe that's something else to think about.
No, I love that. And I think it just within your community as well, like we've got Saka, when he missed the penalty for England, he lives just down the road from our school, and the children all came in, they were like, oh, we want to write him letters, and we ended up getting a drone and kind of spelling out his name in our school field and sending him, kind of like all of our support. And his mum and dad came in because he was on holiday, rightly so, he deserved it after, and, like bought us a signed shirt, and it was lovely. And so it doesn't obviously have to be that big. That was incredible for our school, but I think just even within your community, if you find out who's there, you can kind of reach out, and if you get something back as well, it really does, like for them, because they'd reached out, the kindness, and then he did something very kind back, and it was really heartening to see. And
that's something else that you can build on, Holly, isn't it? How did that make you feel when you did that and he did that? How did he, it just opens up that whole discussion and that talking about emotions and feelings that Hugh was talking about earlier. Yeah. Amazing. You're already doing so much.
You mentioned about the idea of being authentic and listening to what the kids want to talk about and the topics and keeping them fresh and relevant. But to what extent should schools be involved in perhaps steering or picking out some of the juicy ideas? So, for example, if Sue was talking about this idea of kindness, how might Holly influence, or should she keep away from, where the schools move in certain directions if there are certain concepts that the schools want to try and implement? So the question really is, should schools be authentically hands-off, or should they incorporate some of their own concepts within what the children are talking about?
I think that if you're starting it, you need to jumpstart it. You need to have a focus that's probably comes from the discussion, and maybe something that that you could end up doing something about. So the first one needs to be a win-win. So when you're actually getting them to discuss something, perhaps about changing the arrangements at playtime, then you need to think, right, okay, well, I was going to be changing things at playtime anyway. I wanted to hear what the pupils thought. I've got some money set aside to do something like a play pod or getting some equipment in there. So I think the first one needs to be a sense of success that then inspires the children to come up with, oh, well, what about this? Or have you thought about this? So I think with regards to Pupil Parliament, that would be my advice, is make sure that the first thing that they are talking about, you're going to have success in. And going back to your point, Holly, about the school development plan being written by the children, there are some. Well, there are some schools that actually use pupils to do learning walks, and that they actually go around, and the feedback from the children can actually be more brutal from the senior leaders, because they said, well, I remember one occasion where a girl said, well, why are the Year 6 still got those posters on the wall about, I think it was something to do with grammar. They should know them by the time they get to Year 6, so they shouldn't have a poster on the wall. So it's quite fascinating. So give them something that they will have the sense of success to start off with.
I should just mention, because some people will be watching this later and they won't see the chat boxes that are going on at the moment, but just to mention that Bridget has put up a point saying that the question was whether anyone else has run a pupil conference like this, and in particular, would anyone like to link their schools to have a values discussion, so that even if you're not in this session live, feel free to get in touch with us if you want any help with setting this up, or in particular, if you want to connect with other schools. So Holly already has a real great contact with another school in terms of diversity, but I know a lot of schools actually struggle, particularly within their sort of local environment. They tend to be sort of a fair amount of homogeneity. And it's very easy for us to put schools in touch with other schools, particularly if you want to get some quite diverse groupings, ethnic, religious, sexual orientation, mental competence. So any types of diversity that you want to engage with or introduce, we're very happy to help introduce you to other schools if that's something you want to do. I thought I'd just mention that.
Bridget, you've put up, how does the Pupil Values Conference work? What's that? How do you get involved with that?
Unmute. So it's our first go at it, and actually we were inspired by Hugh's session that he led with 3 of our schools, mine included. Something that I've run on the ground, as it were, with local schools in Herefordshire before. So we set it up for a conference for pupils, like an adult conference. Is how we've done it when we've been able to do it in person, and we've had keynote speakers, you know, choosing people who we know would be able to have a good rapport with the children. We've had ex-pupils, had this great guy who became paraplegic and talked about how values had helped him live his life now and achieve amazing things. He was utterly inspirational. We followed that with various activities. So children met in the days when children could meet face to face from different schools. They met and did activities like cookery. I think our value was unity. So we made pizzas, and there was artwork that they completed around unity from the different schools working together. There's a musical workshop, and we sang a song at the end, and there were goodie bags, you know, the whole lot. So it was tremendous fun, and it's become an established thing pre-COVID with our local schools now, which has been great. But the Values Conference on the 22nd of October is open to everybody, and is going to consist of little films that the pupils have made and have sent in to Nigel and Sue. And so it will run as a virtual event, but it's by children for children. That's the intent, isn't it? Did you want to add anything, Nigel?
Yes, I just so it's fairly soon. It's on the 22nd of October, but it's not just about hearing other people's views. It's about pupils being able to express themselves and share their ideas with other students. And it's on any sort of values-related themes. So there's a couple of leading questions that we're sort of prompting schools to engage with. But you don't have that much time if you want to contribute to the session this time. If you want your pupils to watch it, there's a registration, and I'll put up a web link as to how you can get a simple registration. You just turn up, or you can watch it retrospectively. We'll be recording it. But Holly, it just occurred to me, if you've got the time, and I know there's not much time, but it would be really interesting if your students wanted to talk about why they did that drone exercise with Saka, and what they did and what they felt and what the outcomes were. It's limited to 5 minutes, give or take a bit, but that's the sort of time we're talking about. But I think the reason it might be really interesting is that your school have got something really you should be extremely proud of, because it's a fantastic response, very practical, very real, clearly made a difference, because the fact that his parents came along means it so clearly touched him, because they wouldn't have done that otherwise. I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of people, particularly people bullied, racism. You know, there's so much social media bullying, so much of these sort of issues going on. And it would just be nice to know that there's a silent majority who are actually actively doing something, not necessarily shouting about it. But if you've got time to do a 5-minute contribution, I think it would go down really well. And it's not just in the UK, it'll really be sort of globally. So I've just uploading a link as to where you can get all the details about it. But Holly, feel free to get in touch with me directly. I'll put my email address up there as well. So if you think you do want to do something, it might be worth calling so we can sort of shortcut a lot of the sort of thinking about it. But I don't think it should be too challenging if your students do a 5-minute video.
Oh, I can think of lots already that would absolutely love to do that. Yes.
And talk about engaging it with them. And of course, this is all about kindness. So there's so many values that are raised by it. So I think it would be a wonderful contribution. And there's certainly slots at the moment if they want to contribute. And for other people on this conference, I think on this call, on this session at the moment, are very welcome. If you are interested in contributing something, there is time, so feel free to get in touch with me. Anybody watching this subsequently, I suspect it's going to be a bit late, but you never know. Anyway, so we're really interested if you think your pupils would want to put something together. I think probably I'll wind up the session. Hugh, can I just thank you for coming along and talking with us? I did have high hopes of the meeting, and it's always a bad thing when you have high hopes because they're so often dashed. But no, the opposite. I'm absolutely fascinated by so much of what you said. I love the fact you contextualized the Pupil Parliament. I know a lot of schools feel the pressure to do something exciting, but what I love is the fact that you've allowed this sort of gradual build up so that you don't have to be too ambitious to still get great things happening. And just, Holly, if you don't mind me using you as an example, it's great to see that some schools are already doing an awful lot of fantastic things, but you just take it for granted, and all you focus on is the bits that you would like to do differently. And sometimes what you're achieving with this Pupil Parliament and the sort of slow build-up is you actually self-reflect to see how much great things you're doing. And when it comes all together, it's just incredibly powerful, giving students a voice, the confidence to speak, and the benefits of their ideas coming into practice. So Hugh, thanks so much for talking with us all. I'm really very grateful indeed. Thank you everyone for attending. And hopefully we'll be in touch another time. So thank you very much.